Hi, welcome to the message for May the 29th, the last in this current series. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining me today and for joining us, if you have been doing so, in the other messages. I hope they've been of some benefit to you. Well, one of the things that I've mentioned in the readings, if you've heard the recorded readings, is the way that Jesus often, instead of giving simple answers to simple situations or even simple questions, often leaves a sense of tension. And this is a very powerful thing for teachers to do. It's not only teachers who do it, composers do it when they write music, where the last note of the piece doesn't feel quite right to the listener, and you want there to be one more note. And if it's just that note, the tune would feel right. It's called resolving it. It's hitting the note that resolves it, rounds it off properly, finishes it. And so sometimes composers leave their work with this feeling it wasn't quite properly finished. You may get that feeling sometimes with some films. You watch them and you're a bit caught out by how quickly they end. And you thought, but you haven't sorted it all out. I thought you were going to have a happy ending or a sad ending, or this was going. Now I don't know what happens. Do they do this? Does he do that? Does she? We just don't know. And that is just how art sometimes works. And storytelling, as Jesus did it, is an art. And he was really, really good at it. So in some of his storytelling, he chose not to resolve the issue. And whenever I talk with people about the parables of Luke 15, and I've talked with a lot of people about these three parables now, there is great sympathy in the third parable for the older brother, the one who complains at the end that the situation is not fair. And I referred to this last week. We don't need to go into the details now, but do feel free to pause this at any point and go, I need to reread that parable in Luke 15 so I know what Chris is going on about. So you've got this conversation between the older brother and his dad. The older brother is far from home. Oh, he lives in the house and he works the land, and he's obviously a hard worker, and in his own way, by his own measures, a faithful and true son. But the thing is, he's probably just as far away from the father, certainly the truth about the father, as his younger brother, who has got together about 1/3 of their shared estate, liquidized it, turned it into capital, and gone off and spent it out on pointless, stupid things. And the older brother cannot believe that dad is so easily taken in as to throw not just a party, but to kill the fattened calf. This was the one we're saving for the big occasion. And he says, but this is just not fair, because that's never been done for me, not even any part of it. Anyway, you'll remember that just as the dad goes out to the younger son so that he doesn't make his last steps home in shame, but is embraced and redressed in proper child outfit, child of the house, adult child of the house outfit, etc. So when the older brother refuses to join the party, the dad goes out to speak with him, goes out looking for his lost son. The lost son here, the older son, the older brother, isn't far away in physical distance, but he hasn't grasped yet what it is to belong to the family of the partying dad. That's another term. I keep making up new titles for this parable because the Bible doesn't give it a title, and I like it to have one. So sometimes I call it the parable of the partying people, because it's a parable about three parties, one thrown by a man who's retrieved a lost sheep, one thrown by a woman who's found her lost coin, and one thrown by a dad who says he's found his lost son, who he's received as if back from the dead. He's not found him in the conventional way that the man with the sheep and the woman with the coin has done. He's found him, if you remember from last week, by planting a homing device called love. And it's in the memory of this young man as he hits hard times and remembers the ways of justice and decency and goodness that he grew up around in his dad. So he comes home and Dad says, let's have a feast and celebrate. And I'd like to finish this series by saying, let's have a feast and celebrate. Let's get our head round the rather unexpected good news that God is a partying God. God loves to party. The problem that we sometimes have is we've grown up with a completely different view of God, perhaps even a God who's against partying. And we've grown up with that view, or the impression that that's the view the church holds, for lots of good reasons, I expect. But nonetheless, it's a mistaken view and not what Jesus shows us. God's party, however, is happening pretty much where you are. And the big mistake is to think that God doesn't do parties, so you have to go to the distant country and spend money to have a good time. And part of the message of the parable, no, the party is right here. You just have to open your eyes, open your heart, and say, do you know what? I'm not going to resist it. I'm going to join it. I'm going to be part. In with the dancing and everything, I'm going to be there. We never find out if that's the decision of the older of the two sons, who represents those who've been criticizing Jesus for eating and drinking with people that most people would say you shouldn't really hang out with that crowd. What's the party? Let me tell you what's real fun. And this that I share now, I really mean, and it's based not just on my trust of the gospel of Jesus and the Bible that tells me about that, but actually my own experience too. Here is the best fun. There's lots of ways to have fun, and great. Loads and loads of ways to have fun. Let me tell you where the best fun is found. The best fun is found in places like when the hungry child is fed and has enough to eat. Or even better, when that child will never be hungry again. Or even better than that, when justice is such that the child doesn't know what it is to get seriously hungry. Or when somebody who is just broken in life finds life to be good and discovers some self-confidence, discovers something of their own worth, starts to believe that they are of value. Or even better, when people just never learn the lie that they're supposedly not as valuable as others, not as important, not as significant, don't count as much. The party is exactly in those words from Isaiah that we had in the reading that Luke records Jesus reading out in the synagogue in chapter 4 of Luke's Gospel, that the spirit of the partying God is on him because he's going to preach good news to the poor. He's going to bring healing to those who can't see so that they begin to perceive truth. He's going to proclaim freedom for captives. Things change where God parties. And people who are living in misery live in freedom and justice and truth and plenty and fairness, generosity, open-heartedness. It's the great human God party, and it's fantastic. There are other ways to have a great time. but most of them only last briefly. And they're great, just, enjoy what's enjoyable and good. Why not? Whatever it is. If it's good, why don't we enjoy it? Party. I'm talking about the best party. The party that brings us into the very presence and activity of the partying God. The party that we share with Jesus. I want us to hear the invitation of the Father in the parable to those around him, the servants, etc. Let's have a feast and celebrate. So I want to encourage us towards that. In our readings, I chose to include Hebrews chapter 12 and the first 2 verses to take us into something which is key to this party. You see, the older son does show us the truth, as in fact do Jesus' critics, that human beings find forgiveness very hard. They find it difficult. And this older brother almost certainly would have concurred. I mean, we can't tell, but in culture, it would be expected that this older brother would have received his younger brother back again to work on the farm. But he should come crawling home. He shouldn't just walk into the full privileges of sonship again. He squandered 1/3 of all that they have to feed themselves, look after those who depend upon them, run the household, and keep the farm sustainable for every generation of the family and the retaining families on into an indefinite future. Farming's like that. The land, if you look after it, will go on and on and on, looking after those who look after it. It's sustainable. And this younger brother of his has spoiled it and ruined it. He can come home, but he needs to crawl home. But Dad, in the parable, shows complete indifference to any act of forgiveness. When the younger son starts his introductory speech, the dad shows no interest at all in the idea of saying, "You're forgiven, son," or any of that. He just says, "Party time!" He cuts straight over it. It's as if he can't perceive his younger son's brutal sin, which will have wrung that dad's heart out when his son told him, "Dad, in effect, I wish you were dead so I could have the money because that's all you're worth to me." And no wonder the older son is incensed by this. We get that. We understand it. But he needs to get something. He needs to join the party. And so Dad goes out to plead with him. No, see this a different way. Why doesn't the dad even wait for an apology? Why does the dad show no interest at all in confession, absolution, in a formal act, any of those things? Never speaks of it. He wafts it to one side when the younger son tries. And when the older son tries to bring it up, he says, that's not the issue here. The issue here is your brother, who was as dead to us and was lost to us, but he's alive and is found. That's the issue. So the dad shows no awareness in the partying side of things. Well, in the Old Testament, there was a sacrifice system for the ancient people of Israel, in which an animal would be slaughtered, and this would atone for the wrongdoings of the people who then would dine out on the meat from the animal. And this word atonement is one that Christians use a lot. It's derived from the Old Testament word, which actually means to cover over, to cover up. In other words, to make invisible, to make out of sight, to take it out of awareness. So the constant plea in the Old Testament is that our sins be atoned for, that God somehow will do whatever it does, that whatever it takes for God to do, and surely only God can understand how to forgive us and what has to be done to achieve that. We can't understand that, obviously, but because that's forgiveness has got to happen in the heart of God, hasn't it? So only God understands that. So atonement is God's way of taking out of God's awareness what we've done that's so offensive, so appalling towards Dad, and so appalling towards the rest of the family too, to everyone else. So wrong. And there it is. What Jesus is saying to us is God is on the case to take out of his own awareness what we do wrong. Instead, he says, guys, let's party. Why don't we make good news happen across this tearful earth? Why don't we take hold of some situations and let's work together on them? And you can party with me in bringing healing and wholeness and justice and peace to a world that's so lost and so dead. Why don't we work together to offer the fullness of life? Friends, sisters and brothers, let's have a feast and celebrate. I mean, the real feast, the one that is so good, it lasts forever. God bless you as you come home.